I never thought I'd find myself sitting in a lawyer's office at age 32, watching my family tear itself apart over my parents' will. But there I was, Alexandra Martinez, clutching a folder containing the deed to what my uncle had just mockingly called 20 acres of rocks and weeds. The reading of the will had gone exactly as everyone expected, almost everyone. My older sister Diane inherited the sprawling family mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, along with most of our parents' liquid assets. My uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother and business partner, received control of the family's real estate development company. And I got the land, a plot in the mountains that Dad had bought decades ago and seemingly forgotten about. Well, that seems appropriate, Uncle Robert said, adjusting his designer tie with manicured fingers. His smirk carried decades of barely concealed disdain. Your father always did have a sense of humor, didn't he? Diane didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. At least they didn't completely forget you, Alex. Maybe you can build a nice little cabin and finally move out of that apartment. I said nothing, remembering the last conversation I'd had with Dad before the accident. We'd been in his study, surrounded by the familiar scent of leather-bound books and aged whiskey. He'd been different that day, more serious than usual, his eyes carrying a weight I hadn't seen before. Alexandra, he'd said, using my full name in that way that always meant something important was coming. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones others overlook. Remember that. At the time, I thought he was just trying to make me feel better about my recent career change from corporate law to environmental consulting. Now, sitting in the lawyer's office, those words took on a different meaning. "We'll need you to sign these papers, Mr. Harrison," the family lawyer said, sliding a stack of documents across his polished mahogany desk. Standard transfer of property forms. As I reached for the pen, Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "You know, Alex, if you want to sell that land, Martinez Development would be happy to take it off your hands. Say, 50,000. That's more than generous for useless mountain property." The casual way he said it, like he was doing me a favor, made something shift inside me. I'd spent my whole life being the family disappointment, the one who didn't apply herself properly, who chose environmental work over the family business, who dared to suggest that maybe constant development wasn't always in everyone's best interest. "Thank you, Uncle Robert," I said, keeping my voice neutral as I signed the papers. "But I think I'll hold on to it for now." His expression darkened slightly. "Don't be foolish, girl. What are you going to do with it?" "Plant trees. Save the butterflies." "Something like that," I replied, gathering my things. The deed felt heavy in my hands, like it carried more weight than just paper should. That evening, I sat in my modest apartment, spreading out old maps and property records across my dining table. Dad had bought the land in 1985, paying what seemed like an unusually high price for what everyone described as worthless property. That was my first clue. Dad never made bad investments. Never. I pulled up satellite images on my laptop, studying the topography. The property sat high in the mountains, predominantly rocky terrain with sparse vegetation. But what caught my eye was its location. It sat directly above the watershed that fed into the valley below. The valley where our family mansion, along with several other luxury estates, drew their water supply. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane. "Hope you're not too disappointed about the will. But honestly, what did you expect? You've never shown any interest in the family legacy." I didn't respond. Instead, I made a call to an old college friend who now worked as a geological surveyor. "Hey Mark, remember when you said you owed me a favor? I need a comprehensive survey done. Water rights, mineral deposits, everything. And Mark, I need it kept quiet." As I hung up, I looked at the deed again, thinking about Dad's last words to me. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones others overlook. Uncle Robert had offered $50,000 for the land without hesitation. Why make any offer at all for worthless property? That night, I dreamed of the mountains, of underground streams flowing beneath ancient rocks, carrying secrets as old as the earth itself. When I woke up, I knew I was right. This inheritance was far more than just rocks and weeds. What I didn't know yet was how this piece of land would change everything. Not just for me, but for my entire family. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms, and sometimes the most satisfying revenge is simply revealing the truth that others tried to hide. The next morning, I started digging deeper into the property records, and what I found made me understand exactly why Uncle Robert was so interested in my worthless inheritance. The property records told a story that made my blood run cold. In 1985, the year Dad bought the land, there had been a fierce bidding war for it. The other interested party, a water rights company that mysteriously dissolved just days after Dad acquired the property. A company that, after some digging, I discovered had been secretly owned by none other than Uncle Robert. I was staring at these documents in my home office when Mark called. "Alex, you need to see this," he said, his voice tense with excitement. "I've completed the preliminary survey. Your 20 acres? They sit on top of an aquifer. A big one. And based on the geological formations, it's the primary water source for the entire valley." My hands tightened on the phone. The whole valley? Including the estates? Including everything. That mansion your sister inherited? Its water supply comes directly from your land. But here's the kicker. The property rights your father secured include complete control of the watershed. Whoever owns that land essentially controls the water rights for the entire area. I sat back, pieces clicking into place. Dad hadn't given me worthless land, he'd given me power. The next day, I received another call, this time from Uncle Robert's assistant. "Mr. Martinez would like to revise his offer for your property. He's prepared to offer $200,000. "Thank him for the offer," I replied coolly, "but I'm still not interested in selling." That afternoon, I hired a water rights attorney and a team of environmental consultants. If I was right about what Uncle Robert was planning, I would need them. Sure enough, 3 days later, Martinez Development announced plans for a new luxury resort development in the valley. The promotional materials boasted of private lakes, water features, and sustainable water management. I nearly laughed at that last part. I waited until the press conference was in full swing before making my move. As Uncle Robert stood at the podium, outlining his grand vision to a room full of investors, I walked in with my team of experts. "Sorry I'm late," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I thought the owner of the water rights should be present for this discussion." Uncle Robert's face went pale. "Alexandra, what are you doing here?" I smiled, channeling years of corporate law training. "Just making sure everyone has all the facts before making any commitments. You see, that resort you're planning? It would require a massive increase in water usage from the aquifer. An aquifer that, as it happens, I control." The room erupted in murmurs. One of the investors stood up. "Mr. Martinez, what is she talking about?" I gestured to my environmental consultant, who began distributing reports. "These documents show the projected impact of the proposed development on the local watershed. As the legal owner of the water rights, I've had experts assess whether the aquifer could sustain such usage without damaging the ecosystem." "This is ridiculous," Uncle Robert sputtered. "The water rights are mine," I cut in, "along with the responsibility to ensure they're managed sustainably. And according to these assessments, your development would threaten the water supply for everyone in the valley, including, I might add, my sister's new mansion." The investor who had spoken earlier was now flipping through the report, his frown deepening. Others were pulling out phones, whispering urgently. "Of course," I continued, "I'm open to discussing alternative development plans. Ones that prioritize environmental sustainability and responsible water management. In fact, I have some proposals right here." I pulled out my own presentation materials. Plans I'd spent the last week developing with my team. Plans that would allow for sensible development while protecting the watershed and surrounding ecosystem. "You can't do this," Uncle Robert hissed as investors began gathering around my proposals. "Your father." "My father knew exactly what he was doing," I replied quietly. "He knew you tried to exploit the valley just like you've exploited everything else. That's why he left the water rights to someone who would protect them." The next few hours were a blur of negotiations, but by the end, everything had changed. The resort project was dead, replaced by a more modest development plan that included extensive environmental protections. More importantly, Martinez Development would now have an environmental oversight committee, which I would chair. That evening, as I sat in my apartment looking at the mountain property on my laptop, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Why didn't you tell me about the water rights?" I thought about it for a moment before replying. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones others overlook. A week later, I stood on my 20 acres of rocks and weeds, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold. The wind whispered through the sparse trees, and somewhere below, the aquifer continued its ancient flow, sustaining life in ways that went far beyond dollar signs and development deals. I thought about Dad, about that last conversation in his study. He hadn't just given me land, he'd given me a purpose, a way to protect something precious while proving that true value isn't always obvious at first glance. Uncle Robert still won't look me in the eye at family gatherings, but he's learned to respect my position on the oversight committee. Diane has become surprisingly supportive, especially after I explained how protecting the watershed would preserve her mansion's value for generations to come. As for me, I've built that nice little cabin my sister mockingly suggested, though it's more of an environmental research station now. We monitor the watershed, study the ecosystem, and ensure that development in the valley remains sustainable. Sometimes I sit on the porch of my cabin, looking out over the land that everyone thought was worthless, and I smile thinking about how wrong they were. Not just about the land's monetary value, but about its true worth as a guardian of resources, a check against unchecked development, and a reminder that real power often lies in protecting what others would exploit. Dad knew that. He knew that while Diane wanted the mansion and Uncle Robert craved control of the company, I would understand the real value of these 20 acres, not as something to be sold or developed, but as something to be preserved and protected. The story of how I turned worthless land into a powerful force for environmental protection has become something of a legend in development circles. These days, when developers present their plans for the valley, they lead with environmental impact studies and sustainability measures. They know that the woman who owns the water rights won't be swayed by dollar signs alone. Last month, I found an old photo of Dad standing on this very spot, looking out over the valley. On the back, in his careful handwriting, was a note I'd never noticed before. For Alexandra, because sometimes true wealth flows beneath the surface. I framed that photo. It hangs in my cabin now, a reminder that inheritance isn't just about what we receive, but about what we choose to do with it. And sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave is protecting something precious for future generations. As the sun sets over my 20 acres of rocks and weeds, I think about how this land has changed me, changed my family, and maybe even changed how development happens in this little corner of the world. Not bad for a worthless inheritance.